She was just a quiet black woman living on her family farm, with dreams of love, peace, and a simple future. But one terrifying incident with her beloved horse changed everything, and what followed will break your heart and restore your faith in strength, love, and survival. Watch to the very end to witness how Lucia rose from pain to hope. If this story moves you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. Your support means the world. The golden plains of San Juan Farm stretched endlessly under the wide Texas sky. There was a kind of stillness here that could not be explained, only felt, like the hush before a sunrise, like the whisper of wheat swaying in the breeze. To Lucia, this land wasn't just soil and fence posts, it was blood and memory. Every stone, every blade of grass, every hoof print carried a story, and she knew them all. Lucia was a striking woman in her late 20s, with deep brown skin that glowed under the sunlight and hair she kept tied back under a scarf while working. She had grown up here, raised by her father after her mother died giving birth to her. The farm had been in their family for generations, and Lucia learned early what it meant to work with the earth, and to love it. But the true heart of her childhood had been Tornado, the proud, glossy black stallion her father had given her on her 10th birthday. He was more than a horse. He had been her companion through grief, through loneliness, through coming of age. Tornado had a wild spirit, but he was gentle with her, and their bond was unbreakable. He seemed to sense her moods before she spoke, often walking up to nuzzle her cheek when she was upset or restless. When her father passed away 5 years ago, leaving the farm in her hands, Tornado was the one thing that grounded her. Through long days of tilling fields, tending crops, and managing livestock, she always found comfort in grooming him, riding him along the fences, and whispering her worries into his strong neck. And then came Raphael. She had met him at the livestock exchange 3 years ago, a tall, soft-spoken man with strong hands and an easy smile. He wasn't flashy. He didn't try to charm her. He simply asked if she needed help unloading her feed sacks. They started talking, and the talks turned into dinners, and dinners into shared mornings. Raphael was a farmer too, from a smaller piece of land nearby. He understood the quiet pride of manual work, the joy of an early harvest, the exhaustion that came with love for land and life. Together, they built something more than a relationship. They built a rhythm. Lucia would rise before the sun to start the milking while Raphael prepared the grain for the livestock. In the evenings, they sat on the porch, watching the orange horizon melt into the hills, speaking softly or not at all. There was comfort in that silence. It meant trust. But lately, she'd noticed something off. Tornado had begun acting different. At first, it was small. He would back away when she tried to bridle him. Then he started snorting more aggressively, pawing at the ground when people came too close. One day, he refused to let her mount him at all, kicking the stable door until she backed off. Raphael noticed too, but they both brushed it off as the stallion aging or perhaps being spooked by coyotes near the northern ridge. But the unease remained. Tornado's eyes, usually so intelligent and warm, now looked wild, unfocused. He paced restlessly in his stall at night, chewing through wood, sweating for no reason. Lucia told herself it would pass, that maybe he just needed more time outdoors. Yet something in her gut whispered otherwise. One evening, as the heat of the day settled and the crickets began their nightly symphony, Lucia stood at the paddock watching Tornado. He didn't approach her as usual. Instead, he kept his distance, staring at her, nostrils flaring. When Raphael came to stand beside her, he put an arm around her shoulders. "He's not right," Raphael said quietly. Lucia nodded. "He's never acted like this, not even after my father died. We should call a vet, just in case." She agreed, though the idea of strangers near Tornado filled her with anxiety. But logic won. They couldn't risk keeping an unpredictable horse on a working farm. The vet, a middle-aged woman named Dr. Grayson, came 2 days later. She was cautious around Tornado, inspecting him from a distance at first before moving in with a practiced calm. "He's showing signs of neurological agitation," she said after the exam. "Could be a number of things, a head injury, infection, maybe even rabies." Lucia's heart sank. "Rabies?" "It's rare, but possible. We'll need to isolate him, watch for further symptoms. Has he had contact with any wild animals?" "There's been a raccoon problem near the southern field," Raphael added. Dr. Grayson nodded gravely. "We'll have to monitor him closely. If it's rabies, things could escalate fast." The word echoed in Lucia's mind long after the vet left. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat on the edge of the bed, listening to Tornado's occasional snorts and hooves tapping against the stable walls. Raphael reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "He's strong. Whatever this is, we'll figure it out." But the unease didn't go away. The next morning brought no peace. Lucia found Tornado foaming at the mouth, eyes rolling violently. She called Dr. Grayson immediately, who promised to return by midday. Raphael had gone into town for supplies, so Lucia was alone on the farm. Then it happened. A scream echoed across the pasture. Lucia rushed out to find one of the mares down in the paddock, her body twisted, legs bleeding. Tornado stood over her, nostrils flaring, body heaving. His mouth was stained red. Lucia froze in place. Her heart pounded. Slowly, cautiously, she approached. "Tornado. Easy, boy." But he turned his head sharply, ears pinned back, and, in a blur of motion, charged. She barely had time to run. He cornered her in the stable, eyes wild with something feral. He pushed against her with a terrifying strength, forcing her back into the hay, his body heavy, powerful, invasive. She screamed, fought, pushed against him with all her might. Just when she thought she wouldn't be able to hold him off, Raphael appeared. With a shovel in hand, he struck Tornado's side, yelling his name. The stallion reared, screaming, and ran off into the far corner of the pasture, panting, enraged. Raphael dropped to his knees beside Lucia, who was trembling, her face scratched, her breath shallow. They sat in silence for a long time, arms around each other. By the time Dr. Grayson returned, Tornado was shaken in a corner, clearly deteriorating. She administered a sedative, then explained the terrible truth. "It's advanced. There's no doubt now. He has rabies. I'm so sorry." Lucia didn't speak. She simply nodded as tears streamed down her face. That night, Tornado was euthanized, humanely, quietly. Lucia didn't sleep. She sat in the stable, staring at the empty stall, her hands clenched in her lap. Something had broken. Something had ended. But deep inside, though she didn't know it yet, something else had just begun. The sun rose over San Juan Farm, casting long shadows over the hills. The familiar morning haze did little to soften the heaviness that had settled in the hearts of Lucia and Raphael. Tornado was gone. The stallion, who had once symbolized strength and loyalty, now lived only in memories, memories tainted by violence, confusion, and sorrow. The barn stood strangely silent. The neighboring horses were restless, and the mares wouldn't go near Tornado's old stall. Even the farm dogs, usually quick to bark or play, seemed subdued. Grief had a way of silencing everything. Lucia stayed quiet in the days that followed. She worked the fields as usual, fed the animals, and kept the home clean. But something in her had shifted. She no longer lingered in the barn. She avoided the paddocks at dusk. At night, when Raphael held her, she lay stiff in his arms, eyes open, listening to the wind rustle the leaves and wondering if she could ever feel safe again. Raphael noticed, of course. He didn't pressure her to talk, but he tried to fill the silence, cooking her favorite meals, fixing the broken kitchen window, tending to chores she normally handled herself. She appreciated it, even if she couldn't always say so out loud. She was grateful for his presence, for his strength, but she also needed time. Time to process what had happened. Time to believe again in the calmness of the land. A week after Tornado's death, the vet returned to make sure all other animals on the property remained healthy. So far, none had shown symptoms, but Dr. Grayson insisted on observation. "There's no evidence that the rabies spread," she told them, "but you both need to monitor your own health closely for the next several weeks. If anything feels off, fever, numbness, disorientation, you call me or head to the clinic. Immediately." Lucia nodded. She was still covered in bruises from the encounter, mostly on her arms and back. She hadn't spoken about what almost happened. Not to Dr. Grayson, not to Raphael. But the look they'd exchanged that day, when Raphael found her in the hay, said everything. There was no need to put it into words. Days passed, then a week, then 2, and then something strange happened. Lucia began to feel off. At first, it was subtle, a wave of nausea in the mornings, a dizzy spell in the fields. She assumed it was stress or exhaustion, but then her appetite changed. She couldn't stand the smell of cooked eggs. Her body felt heavier. Her emotions swung between tearful and distant. And finally, there was a tension in her lower abdomen, not painful, just present. She tried to ignore it, but the signs became harder to deny. One morning, after barely touching her breakfast, she stepped out onto the porch, the pale light of dawn spilling across the landscape. She looked down at her body. Her hands rested gently on her stomach. She said nothing, but in that moment, she knew. She waited until Raphael came in from the pasture. He smelled like grass and horses, his hat tipped back on his brow. She motioned for him to sit beside her on the steps. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Rafa, I think I'm pregnant." Raphael blinked, stunned. "Are you sure?" She nodded slowly. "Not completely, but I feel it. Something's changing." He didn't speak right away. He took her hands in his, staring into her face, trying to read between her words. And then, slowly, his eyes welled up. They held each other for a long time, hearts beating loud in the stillness. The next day, they drove to the clinic in town. Dr. Velasco, a kindly older man who had known Lucia's family for decades, greeted them with warmth and concern. He performed a series of exams and tests, and by the end of the appointment, he was smiling. "You were right," he said, handing Lucia the early ultrasound. "You're pregnant, and it looks like you're having twins." Lucia sat in stunned silence as Raphael exhaled and pressed his forehead against hers. The word twins rang through her chest like a bell. It felt like a gift, a second chance, a strange, mysterious redemption. That night, back at the farm, Lucia stood alone in the barn, not near Tornado's stall, but close enough to see it. She placed a hand on her belly, her other hand brushing the wood of the stable door. "I don't understand why things happened the way they did," she whispered. "But if there's life growing in me now, I'll fight for it." As the weeks passed, the farm began to breathe again. Lucia's belly grew steadily. The neighbors, having heard whispers of the tragic loss of the horse, began to check in more frequently, dropping off pies or lending tools. But not all whispers were kind. It started with glances at the market in Los Altos. Then came the murmurs. Lucia heard her name mentioned in the aisles of the general store behind her back at the feed supply. A few people seemed to smirk as she walked by. And then, one afternoon, standing in line for fresh produce, she overheard it. "After what happened with that horse, you're telling me she just magically ends up pregnant? I'm just saying, things don't add up. She spent more time with that stallion than with her husband, that's all I'm saying." Lucia froze. Her face went hot. Her hands trembled. She turned around slowly, locking eyes with the two women. Strangers, but not really. Everyone in a small town is a kind neighbor. Neither of them looked apologetic. Before she could speak, a voice rose behind her. "You should be ashamed of yourselves." It was Raphael. He stepped forward, face flushed with anger. "She's carrying life inside her, and you're out here spreading filth like it's gossip. That's my wife. That's our family. You don't get to tarnish that." The silence was deafening. The market seemed to freeze for a moment, and the women quickly turned away, pretending to browse melons. Lucia swallowed back tears. They left without saying another word. That night, Raphael sat with her on the porch as the sun dipped low over the hills. He held her hand gently. "I don't care what they say. I know you. I know who you are." She leaned against his shoulder, watching the sky. "I just want to believe this is all happening for a reason," she whispered. He kissed the side of her head. "It is. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." And for a little while, despite the rumors and fear, the land was quiet again. But inside Lucia, something had begun to stir. A life or two, and, with it, a storm that neither of them yet saw on the horizon. The farm woke slowly in the amber hush of early morning. Dew clung to the grass, and the breeze carried the scent of earth and old hay. Lucia sat on the porch swing, wrapped in a faded blanket, her hands resting on the gentle swell of her belly. The sound of Raphael's footsteps behind her was as familiar as the rhythm of her own breath. "You didn't sleep again," he said quietly, sitting beside her with a warm mug of tea. Lucia shook her head. "I tried. The baby," she caught herself, "the babies are active, and something just doesn't feel right." She hadn't told him everything, not the strange tightness in her chest, the pounding headaches, or the faintness that had caused her to collapse while feeding the goats yesterday morning. She didn't want to worry him. Not yet. The excitement that had filled their hearts when Dr. Velasco announced the twin pregnancy had not diminished, but it had begun to mix with something else. Doubt. Unease. At first, the changes in Lucia's body had seemed like a normal part of pregnancy. Morning sickness, cravings, mood swings. But now, barely into the second trimester, her stomach had grown unnaturally large. The size didn't match the weeks. Dr. Velasco was puzzled. He had performed another ultrasound and hadn't found anything immediately alarming. "Could just be excess fluid," he had said, but his expression lingered with concern. "We'll monitor closely." Still, even his words couldn't erase the growing fear in Lucia's mind. Each night she would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, one hand over her belly. The movement inside her felt forceful, unsettling. Sometimes it seemed like the babies were fighting for space, or worse, struggling. The physical discomfort worsened. Her feet swelled painfully, her back throbbed with every step. Simple tasks, brushing her hair, changing clothes, left her breathless. She tried to hide it from Raphael, putting on a smile in the mornings and quietly crying at night when he fell asleep. Despite everything, she kept going. She tended the chickens, helped Raphael in the garden, and visited the stables, though she never entered the stall where Tornado once lived. That part of the barn remained closed, the wood aging and quiet like a gravestone. Then came the dizziness. Lucia had just walked out to the pasture to fill the troughs when the world tilted. Her knees buckled. She collapsed onto the grass, struggling to draw breath. Everything blurred. The last thing she remembered was Raphael's voice calling her name, then blackness. She woke in bed with cold compresses on her forehead and Raphael gripping her hand. "You scared me," he whispered. "I think something's wrong," she said, barely audible. They returned to Dr. Velasco the next day. This time, the older man's smile was absent. He asked Lucia a series of detailed questions, ran more tests, and finally sat down with a grave look in his eyes. "There's a mass," he said, "a sizable one near the uterus." Lucia gripped Raphael's hand tightly. "What kind of mass?" Raphael asked. "We can't confirm anything without a biopsy," Dr. Velasco replied gently. "But it may be a tumor." For a moment, time froze. The room was silent except for the faint buzz of fluorescent lights. Lucia leaned forward. "What does that mean? For the babies?" The doctor hesitated. "If it's malignant, and we don't act, it could spread quickly, but surgery now could risk the pregnancy. This is a deeply personal decision and not one I can make for you." Lucia sat still, letting the words sink in. Cancer, twins, a choice between herself and the children she hadn't even held yet. She closed her eyes, breathing in slowly, then nodded once. "I want to wait. I want to give them a chance." Raphael turned toward her. "Lucia," she looked at him firm, "I'm not ready to give them up." He didn't argue. He simply pulled her close and whispered, "Then we fight. Together." When they returned to the farm that evening, the air was cool and dry. Clouds gathered on the horizon, threatening a storm. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was shared, understood. That night, Lucia sat on the porch with Raphael at her side and placed his hand on her belly. "They're moving," she said. He smiled faintly. "They're strong, like you." In the distance, thunder rumbled. Meanwhile, the town of Los Altos was whispering. Rumors had grown legs and teeth. What began as curious murmurs had evolved into open speculation. In the bakery line at the post office outside church, people muttered about the unnatural pregnancy, about the timing, about Tornado. "She was too close to that animal," some said. "I heard the vet wouldn't even talk about what she saw. Something isn't right with her." It was cruel and absurd, but in a small town, fear needed a shape, and sometimes it took the form of an innocent woman. Lucia felt the weight of every glance, every silence that followed when she walked into a room. She stopped going to town unless absolutely necessary. Raphael shielded her as much as he could, but even he couldn't hold back the tide of judgment swelling around them. One afternoon, while walking past the town square, Raphael overheard two women talking openly. "She should be ashamed, walking around like nothing happened. They're saying the baby's already deformed, maybe both of them." He turned on them, rage blazing in his eyes. "You don't know anything. You have no right to speak about my wife or our children." The women fell silent, eyes wide, backing away as Raphael stormed off. But the damage was done. He returned home with clenched fists, barely able to speak. Lucia met him at the door, concern etched across her face. "What happened?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. He simply wrapped his arms around her, held her tightly, and buried his face in her shoulder. I just want them to come, he whispered. I want to see them. I want you to be okay. She nodded, her voice quiet. Me too. But she knew, deep inside, something was coming. Not just labor, not just birth, something bigger, and she wasn't sure they were ready. The night was unnaturally quiet. Even the crickets had gone still. A low wind whispered through the dry fields of San Juan, carrying with it the heavy scent of rain and the faint electricity of a storm yet to break. Inside the farmhouse, Lucia sat curled on the edge of the bed, one hand gripping the mattress, the other clutching her swollen belly. Her breaths came fast and shallow. Something wasn't right. She had felt strange all day, sluggish, dizzy, lightheaded, but had chalked it up to exhaustion. At 7 months pregnant, with twins and a tumor growing inside her, she had long stopped expecting to feel normal. But now, in the dim orange light of the bedside lamp, she felt something new, a tightening, a sharp pressure deep within her, followed by warmth. She looked down. Blood. The sheet beneath her was quickly darkening, and a searing pain erupted across her abdomen. She cried out, "Raphael!" Footsteps thundered down the hallway. Raphael burst into the room, eyes wide in alarm. One glance at the bed and he was moving, grabbing her coat, wrapping his arms around her, lifting her gently as her body shook in his arms. "I've got you. I've got you," he repeated, his voice thick with panic and desperation. They didn't wait for an ambulance. There was no time. Raphael placed Lucia in the truck and sped down the narrow dirt roads, the tires screaming over gravel as the wind howled louder. Rain had begun to fall in soft splashes on the windshield as they reached the main highway, but Raphael didn't ease up. Lucia drifted in and out of consciousness, clutching her stomach, teeth clenched against the growing agony. Her vision blurred, and in the fading corners of her mind, she thought only of one thing: let them live. By the time they reached the hospital in Los Altos, her skin had gone pale and cold. Nurses rushed out with a gurney, and Raphael ran beside her, refusing to let go of her hand until they forced him to stop at the operating room doors. "She's crashing!" one nurse shouted. "Page Dr. Velasco, stat!" The doors swung closed, and Raphael was left alone in the hallway, soaked with rain, trembling. He sank into a chair, face buried in his hands. Minutes passed, then an hour, then 2. The storm outside grew louder, hammering against the windows as if the heavens themselves were demanding answers. Raphael sat there, unmoving, staring at the red "in operation" light above the door. He prayed without knowing if he even believed in prayer. He whispered Lucia's name. He pictured her smile, the porch swing, her hand in his, the feel of their unborn children kicking beneath his palm. Finally, the doors opened. Dr. Velasco emerged, peeling off surgical gloves, his face a complex blend of relief and exhaustion. "She's stable," he said. "We had to act fast. She lost a lot of blood, but we stopped the hemorrhaging." Raphael jumped to his feet. "The babies?" Dr. Velasco nodded slowly. "They're small, very small, but they're alive, breathing on their own. They're in the NICU now." Tears rushed to Raphael's eyes. He collapsed into the doctor's arms, overcome by the surge of emotion, relief, gratitude, and sheer, crushing fatigue. "Thank you," he whispered. Lucia opened her eyes to dim hospital light and the slow rhythm of a heart monitor. Her mouth was dry, her throat raw, but when she turned her head and saw Raphael asleep in the chair beside her, she felt something like peace for the first time in weeks. He stirred as if sensing her gaze. "Hey," he said softly, moving to her side. You're okay. You're here." She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. "The babies?" Raphael smiled through his tears. "They're fighters, like you. They made it." Lucia let out a breath that was more sob than sigh. "I thought I was losing them," she whispered. "You didn't. You saved them." Later that day, a nurse wheeled Lucia, still too weak to walk, to the NICU. She saw them through the clear incubators, two impossibly small, fragile beings. One wrapped in soft pink, the other in blue, a girl and a boy, tiny hands, closed eyes, breathing, living. She reached a trembling hand toward the glass. "Aurora," she said, voice catching, and Mateo. Raphael stood behind her, his hands on her shoulders. "They're perfect." She nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. For the next few weeks, life became a slow rhythm of healing. Lucia remained in the hospital, undergoing light chemotherapy and blood treatments. The tumor was inoperable for now, but her doctors were cautiously optimistic. The focus was survival, one day at a time. Every morning, Lucia visited the NICU. Every ounce Aurora gained, every breath Mateo took without a machine was a celebration. Nurses started calling them miracles. Even Dr. Velasco, usually so reserved, allowed himself to smile. News of what had happened, of the pregnancy, the near death, the premature birth, spread through Los Altos. Many townsfolk who had once whispered behind Lucia's back began to reconsider their words. They watched from afar as a woman they had mocked fought with everything she had to bring life into the world. And then, unexpectedly, came support. It started with Lucia's childhood friend, Selena, who returned from out of town when she heard about the incident. Selena spoke up at church, at the general store, on social media. She told the truth about Lucia, about her strength, about the cruelty of the rumors. Slowly, support poured in. Strangers donated supplies for the babies. Neighbors offered help on the farm. Cards arrived at the hospital with warm, handwritten notes. Someone left flowers at Tornado's old stable door, wrapped in white ribbon. Lucia didn't forget the pain. She didn't pretend the trauma had passed, but she accepted the kindness, and in doing so, she began to heal. One afternoon, as she sat with Aurora sleeping in her arms and Mateo nestled against her chest, she turned to Raphael. "Do you think it was worth it?" she asked. He looked at her, pale but glowing, weary but alive, and then down at their children. "Yes," he said, "every second of it." Lucia looked out the hospital window. The storm had long since passed, and outside the sky was blue. But she had been through her own storm, and somehow, despite it all, she had survived. And so had they. The wind rustled gently through the tall grass of San Juan Farm as the late spring sun dipped low behind the hills. Golden light bathed the land in a soft haze, illuminating the weather-worn fences, the red barn, and the front porch where so much of Lucia's life had played out. The land had waited for her return, and now, finally, she was home. It had been 3 months since that terrible night. 3 long months of hospital corridors, hushed conversations with doctors, and careful steps through recovery. The twins, Aurora and Mateo, had grown stronger with each passing week, until one day Dr. Velasco stood beside Lucia's bed and smiled. "They're ready." She had cried then, not the tears of fear or sorrow, but of release, of arrival. Now, as Raphael carried their sleeping son in one arm and guided Lucia gently from the truck, their daughter nestled against her chest, it felt like the world had come full circle. Life had dragged them through storms, through terror and pain, but had not broken them. Lucia paused at the gate, her feet sinking slightly into the warm earth. She looked out across the land, her land, and let the breeze lift her hair. She took a slow breath, heavy with emotion. "We're home," she whispered. Raphael glanced at her and smiled. Inside the farmhouse, the nursery was ready. The townspeople had helped, painting walls, building cribs, sewing curtains. Selina had arranged for a rocking chair and left behind a basket of hand-knitted blankets. There were gifts from neighbors who had once crossed the street to avoid Lucia, their names now signed with care and apology. But before entering the house, Lucia made a quiet detour. She walked towards the barn, her steps slow and careful. The old wood groaned as she pushed open the door. Sunlight streamed in through the slats, casting stripes of gold across the dust. She stopped in front of Tornado's stall. The door was still closed, untouched since that day. A small bouquet of wildflowers had dried in a jar by the gate, the ones left weeks ago by a stranger. Raphael stood behind her, silent. Lucia reached forward and placed her palm on the rough wood. "You were my beginning," she said softly, "and somehow you led me here. I still don't understand why it ended like that, but I forgive you." She stepped back and looked up at Raphael. "Let's leave it open." He nodded, then gently took her hand and led her back to the house. That evening, the porch was filled with quiet laughter and the rhythmic creak of the rocking chair. Aurora lay on Lucia's chest, dozing in the late warmth, while Mateo stretched in his crib nearby. Raphael stepped out with 2 mugs of tea, setting one beside her. The sky above them glowed with orange and violet hues. Birds circled overhead, returning to their nests. "They're going to grow up with this view," Lucia murmured. Raphael smiled. "It'll be all they know." Lucia turned toward him, her eyes shining. "Do you think they'll remember any of this? What we went through?" "No," he said, "but they'll feel it, in the way we hold them, in the way we never stop fighting for them." The screen door creaked, and Selina stepped out with a camera in hand. "Sorry," she said sheepishly. I want to remember this." Lucia laughed. "Go ahead." Selina raised the camera, and in that moment, the shutter clicked, capturing them. Lucia in the rocker, holding her daughter, Raphael kneeling beside her, one hand resting on her knee, Mateo sleeping peacefully. Behind them, the farmhouse glowed with soft light, and the fields of San Juan stretched endlessly into the horizon. Later that night, Lucia posted the photo online with a simple caption: "We made it through the storm. Thank you to everyone who believed in us. Love is always stronger than fear." A year passed. Spring returned to the farm, bringing with it new growth, new blossoms, and the sound of laughter that echoed across the hills. Aurora took her first steps between the rows of corn, clutching the reins of a toy horse. Mateo, full of energy, crawled across the porch chasing the family dog, his giggles bright in the warm air. Lucia stood under the shade of a tree, her body stronger now, her spirit steadier. The tumor had shrunk with each round of treatment. The doctors remained cautious but hopeful. She no longer lived in fear of tomorrow, only in gratitude for today. Raphael approached from behind, wrapping his arms around her waist. He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair, still damp from the morning. "We did it," he whispered. Lucia leaned back against him, her voice soft. "Yes, we did." They stood like that for a while, watching their children play. The sun rose higher in the sky, casting golden light across the land. The barn, the fields, the porch, they were no longer reminders of pain. They were home. and above them the vast sky stretched endlessly, filled with stars still unseen, waiting to shine when the time was right. Lucia's journey wasn't easy. From loss and judgment to survival and love, she faced it all with unshakable courage. Her story reminds us that even in the darkest moments, hope can bloom. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, subscribe for more powerful stories, and share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you.